Kennedy opened a comfortable lead in the polls in mid-October, but he was careful not to get swept up in the energy and excitement of his rallies. The Catholic question still worried him, and the issue of civil rights demanded cunning political calculation. He placated white supremacist Democrats in the South, who insisted on their right to enforce segregation in their own states. But he also meant to signal his sympathy to the growing number of African-American voters, North and South.
At that time, the 1960s, the black community across the South were largely Abraham Lincoln Republicans. My parents were Republicans, and I was rather cynical about the Kennedy family, that they didn't know any black people. There was a deep-seated personal suffering that we did know in rural South, but Kennedy didn't know any of that.
Kennedy shadowed Nixon's position on civil rights. Both candidates talked of promoting equal opportunity for everyone, but neither was willing to pledge federal power to actually enforce court-ordered integration of schools and public accommodations. As the campaign headed into its final days, though, Kennedy found a way to separate himself from Nixon. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the nation's most respected civil rights leader, was arrested at a protest in Georgia.
They put him in chains and put him in the back of a paddy wagon and drove him 300 miles south to Reidsville Penitentiary in the middle of the night, and nobody knew where he was.
Coretta King was 6 months pregnant, and I had never seen her panic, but she was panicked by this and called me and said, "I think they're going to kill him, and, you know, can't you do anything?"
Kennedy's brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, went to see if the candidate might be willing to reach out to Dr. King's wife. Shriver knew the Kennedy political operation wanted no part of a civil rights controversy in the final days of the campaign.
He said, "You know, you've been trying to figure out what you could do that would help in this situation, and you can't issue a public statement, but what about calling her and conveying your sympathy?" He said Kennedy thought for a couple of minutes, and then a good Kennedy grin said, "That's a very good idea. Do you have her number?" On the airplane, Salinger asked Kennedy, "What, did you do anything when we were all out?" And he said, "Yeah, I called Mrs. Martin Luther King." And they went wild, and Bobby was just livid with anger and fury and fear that it was going to, lose a number of southern states.
Bobby eventually calmed down and made a series of discreet phone calls to help free King. But Kennedy's team kept most of the maneuvering under wraps, and they did not talk up the call to Coretta to the national press. They were, however, quick to take advantage when Mrs. King went public about her sympathetic call from Kennedy. The campaign printed hundreds of thousands of pamphlets telling the story of Kennedy's kindness to the King family and Nixon's silence, and shipped those pamphlets across the country, many by Greyhound bus, to be distributed at black churches.
The reaction that got the publicity was Daddy King saying, "I got a whole suitcase full of votes, and I'm gonna throw them toward this Kennedy boy." I wasn't sure about a Catholic in the White House, but he's won me over.